America's pastime. Baseball was due for a substantial change in 2023, as attendance and viewership decreased and did not improve in 2022. The office took this to heart and gave the Mangers a change of pace. The bases, they got bigger. The pickoffs, they were decreased. And most of all, the pitch clock changed the game forever in a way that no one saw coming. It started in spring training, when the rules still had glaring holes. Pitchers did not know how to handle the new rules, and some, like Max Scherzer, did everything they could to make life miserable for the hitters as a result. Overall, this is one of the ugliest spring trainings in years. Players are getting thrown out at a historic rate. The new rules were causing chaos on the field like never before. But the excitement of the new season brought new faces to new franchises, and they would be in for a real treat. During all of this, the biggest worldwide baseball event was taking place, the World Baseball Classic. Stars were born, others revived, and the world ended up with the matchup that they were dying for, in Ohtani versus Trout. The result was quite the anecdote, as Shohei Ohtani would be baseball's biggest story yet again in 2023. The regular season was finally upon us. While the WBC brought injuries that would hurt competing teams, the excitement of the new season would overcome the stress. Many new toys were available for great teams, yet some would struggle for abnormal amounts of time. The result of the opening month was a mix of both surprises and expectations being met. The Rays made history in the beginning, winning 14 straight games to begin the season, as they hoped to continue that momentum for the rest of the season. Powerhouses such as the Phillies were middling and off to a slow start per usual. This would be a very familiar territory. The Pirates were the surprise team who were successful as they were 11 games above 500 through the opening month. The Mets, Diamondbacks, Dodgers, and Marlins were above average and were looking like late season contenders for the long season ahead. May was upon us. Tampa, Texas, and Atlanta continued their dominance within their divisions with unbelievably elite offenses. The early MVPs started to show. Ohtani was magical, Acuna was sensational, and Castellanos was hanging around. However, while the league was moving smoothly, a team from Missouri was failing miserably and lower than expectations. No, this was not the Royals. The Cardinals were a disaster, but people couldn't give up on them just yet. Their pitching was looking horrendous, and the superstars were not playing as their contracts showed. However, the early nature of the season still gave hope to the team. After only 6 months of recovery, Bryce Harper returned to the field after Tommy John surgery, making him the quickest to return from that type of ailment in the history of baseball. However, until the All-Star break, Harper would struggle to find his power stroke, as struggling Phillies found themselves in the same position they had a year prior. On the left coast, a sneaky collapse was in the making for the star-studded Padres, whose offense showed next to no signs of life. And in the end, the standings were all shaken up. The summer months were here. June brought the offense that the league was looking for when they changed the rules in the offseason. Players were settled down and more comfortable with the rules. Well, some of them at least. The Braves were on a power surge through June. Their offense was on a historic pace thanks to the leg of Ronald Acuna Jr. and Matt Olson, who were looking like the MVP frontrunners for 2023. Shohei Ohtani continued his dominance both on the mound and at the plate, and was once again looking like the AL's MVP. The Marlins were hanging around in the NL East, however, but a carbon copy of the previous season started as the Phillies turned their season around on June 4th against the Nationals. It would surge to 5 games above 500 at the conclusion of the month. In the Central, the Pirates had collapsed and were primed to be sellers at the deadline once again. The Brewers were falling, and the Cardinals were still terrible. The Cubs were middling when all of a sudden a superstar was called up to the big leagues by the Cincinnati Reds, whose name was Elly De La Cruz. Elly turned the Reds around. They were in first place in the Central by the end of the month and were looking like a legit offense. On the other hand, an injured Aaron Judge was not helping the Yankees' horrid offense. They were managing to stay afloat in the tough AL East, but the Rays' dominance continued. However, there was an unlikely team right on their tail in the Baltimore Orioles. This team was legit. Adley Rutschman, Gunnar Henderson, and Ryan O'Hearn were part of the reason why. The Rays had to be cautious of who was behind them, as even teams such as the Rangers were on their tail in the AL, as the Astros were still middling in the West. Spoiler alert, the Rays collapsed. In July, the Rays had their worst month, only winning 8 games. The Orioles did the impossible and overtook them in the AL East. The Yankees, Red Sox, and Blue Jays were all mid, to be nice about it. While the Twins controlled the mid-division, and the Rangers were now only up 0.5 games due to the Houston resurgence, but don't look now, both the Angels and the Mariners were right on their tail as a trade deadline approached. Elsewhere in the West, the A's were on a historic pace, on the wrong side of history. In the NL, the Phillies had moved themselves into the 5th best record in the league, while the Reds were still scorching hot ahead of them. The Braves and Dodgers continued to thrive, as MVP candidate Mookie Betts emerged in the summer months alongside Freddie Freeman. There were many mid-teams in the NL, as the competition was relatively even in the league. August brought the trade deadline. There were many good, not great, pieces available to be dealt. The Angels took almost all of them. They were in a tough situation with the greatest talent of all time on their roster, and they decided to go for it. They destroyed the farm and brought in Lucas Giolito, Reynaldo Lopez, CJ Cron, and many others. They had their sights on the playoffs. While other teams' acquisitions thrived, such as Philly's Lorenzen and Chicago's Candelario, the Angels went on such a terrible run for 2 weeks that they placed all of their acquisitions, along with other players, on waivers. They admitted to their failure, counted their losses, and moved on. But Shohei Ohtani developed an injury that would later be known to give him Tommy John surgery for a second time in his career, derailing his season and more than likely losing him hundreds of millions of dollars in the offseason. By the end of the month, the playoff picture was rounding into form. The Phillies held the top wildcard spot as their fan base turned around the season of their superstar with one positive message. The Cubs, Giants, Diamondbacks, and Marlins were all hanging around in the wild card as well, as they hoped to come through when they needed it. In the AL, the Mariners went an incredible stretch and even held the top spot in their division after softly selling at the deadline for a moment. By the end of the month, they would hold this spot. Milwaukee and the Dodgers were running away with their division at this time, as the Reds and Diamondbacks were slipping toward the wrong end of the spectrum. September was here. The final month of the regular season baseball was stressful and victorious for some, and it was the worst nightmare for others. The Phillies locked down their number 1 wildcard spot in the NL, while by the end of the season, 5 teams were fighting for 2 spots as the Padres tried to invite themselves into the dance but couldn't find a way. The Rays were still on the Orioles' tail in the East. The Blue Jays were fighting with the teams in the West for a spot, and the Twins were locking away their division with the disappointment of a season from the Guardians. The bottom feeders remained similar to past seasons, with the exception of the Cardinals, who could never figure it out and finished last in the NL West. By the end, it was the Chicago Cubs' collapse that helped the Marlins and Diamondbacks into the postseason. The Cubs needed to win 1 game, but couldn't in the end against the Braves. In the AL, the Mariners lost in front of a home crowd to lose their playoff hopes to the Rangers, who also blew their own division to the Astros, who snuck their way into the crown of the West. The playoff picture was set, and while some clubs left with disappointment, many were excited to see where their playoff hopes carried them. It was time. The single greatest month in all of sports every single year, October. Heroes were born in the wild card round. 3 upsets turned the playoffs upside down. The Phillies, Diamondbacks, Twins, and Rangers were moving on to face the very difficult opponents ahead of them. But now, it was time for a historically great team in the Atlanta Braves to face their deja vu. The Phillies were rolling back in and would try to send their message of not caring about their regular season wins. This worked. The Phillies were moving on to the NLCS, but their upset was not the biggest story of the NLDS. The Diamondbacks silenced their fathers in the DS as the Dodgers could not get anything going. The comeback kids who snuck into the postseason had done it. They made it to the NLCS. The AL was not much different. A young, inexperienced Baltimore team was the number 1 seed and on the verge of being remembered. Their surprise season was far from done in their eyes, but the resurging Texas Rangers had other things to say. They busted out the broomsticks. It was a sweep. The Orioles were sent home after 3 games in the postseason. All that could be heard was the tears of high-seeded fans asking to change the playoff format, but it didn't matter. The Astros did what no one else could and won their series as the higher seed. Their dynasty in the AL continued as they advanced their 7th straight ALCS. The championships were set. as a Texas two-step would decide the AL, and a battle of high-octane wildcard teams would decide the NL. The CS brought great matchups, but these series got off to one-sided starts. The Rangers went on the road and won 2 games in the Space City, while the Phillies defended their turf and took the first 2 at home. The series headed to the opposition. The Astros willed their way to a 3-game streak and took control of the series in Arlington. The Snakes headed home and stole back-to-back games on blow leads by Phillies' Craig Kimbrell. Heroes were being born in the desert. Both series headed back to the leaders' homes as they were both at a 3-2 pace. The Rangers would need to do the improbable, win 2 on the road again in Houston. It happened. Adolis Garcia was turning into a superstar as partial ownership of the Astros was handed over. It would be the first World Series in 7 years that the Astros or the Dodgers were not in. In the NL, heartbreak was on the way. A truly magical run on both sides was on the line in Philly. The home crowd wished to will their team to victory, but many of the right-handed Phillies bats went ice cold. The Diamondbacks did the even more improbable and won 2 games in hostile Philadelphia. It was a disappointment for the Phillies. They added a superstar to put them over the top, and in the end, their incredible offense let them down in a big spot. But the Snakes were moving on. An unsung hero of a team was going to the World Series. The Rangers were waiting. An offense that was lethal and could explode at any time made it despite receiving little contributions from one of their best players. A new star was continuing to spread its wings. 1-0 Texas. The next night was one of domination. The Snakes' offense came out and showed up, while Merrill Kelly showed his worth. The series was tied 1-1. We headed to the desert. Arizona was waiting to erupt in Game 3. Corey Seager had other things to say. The Rangers won, but at a cost. Rising star Adolis Garcia left the game and went to the hospital with back pain, while Max Scherzer was hit in the back with a line drive. The Rangers didn't care. 2-1 Texas. Game 4 was a shootout. A 10-0 lead was built on the Diamondbacks' bullpen day as they struggled to find any hope. A late comeback was started but not finished. The Rangers pulled away 11-7. A franchise that had never won the World Series was now 1 win away from glory. 3-1 Texas. Game 5 saw the Aces return to the mound. Early on, this game's story was pitching. Zach Gallen had a no-hitter through 6, but let a run in the 7th. The insurance was added late thanks to an Alek Thomas error and a Marcus Semien bomb. They could taste it until they did it. A team who had a roller coaster missing their $35 million ace still won the World Series, with their star shortstop winning World Series MVP. This concluded the 2023 season. As free agency starts 2 days later, memories made, history seen, and most of all, there was a change of pace to our game that made it even better. Hey, what's going on, guys? Thank you very much for watching this video. It's Sam. I'm the one who made this video, Sentry 17. If you've made it this far, thank you very much for watching the whole entire thing. I really do appreciate you. Obviously, this video took a while, so I was just going to ask you guys to please leave a like on the video to show your support. Subscribe if you have not already. I do all kinds of different baseball content. I'm starting a new podcast as well. All that kind of stuff is in the description. And if you feel so inclined, you can use code Sentry17 on SeatGeek for $20 off your first purchase. Thank you very much for watching this documentary, and I'll see you guys in the next one. Have a great day.